when I was going through school, I didn't say, oh, I want to go work for a firm that designs production housing or tract housing, right? That's not what my goal was, but it was the first job I got, and it was a good job. It was local, and it was a lot of fun. And there was for those that are listening that may not have any high regard for that, because I see it a lot around the profession, and I think it's kind of like the scum of the earth when it comes to architecture. You kind of have the star architects, and then you have the other architects that do residential work. They're pretty much ignored, by most people, except for once a year when record houses come out and everybody goes ooh and ah, and then you've got the bottom dwellers down here, and so I guess what I'm trying to get at is that I've always kind of felt, as I knock this chip off my shoulder here, that I'm not a real architect because I don't do that other type of architecture, whatever that other type of architecture is. And there's materials and methods that I know nothing about, that I've not had any experience with. And so does that make me less of an architect?
Welcome to the Archispeak podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. Each episode, Neil Pan, Cormac Phelan, and I have a casual conversation about all things architecture, and we invite you to listen in as we talk about everything in the profession, both the good and the bad. Maybe you're considering a career in architecture, you're still in school, or you've been around the blocks of Corbusier's City of Tomorrow more times than you'd like to admit. Join us in the studio as we stand around the water cooler and talk about why we love our chosen profession. It's time for some Archispeak.
Welcome to episode 36 of the Archispeak podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Troxel.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
And tonight we're joined by our friend of the show, Lee Calisti. Lee, say hi.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Lee. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
And where are you coming from, Lee? So everyone has kind of an idea of who you are and what you do, and where you are geographically.
Sure. I am in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, smaller town, East Greensburg, Pennsylvania, and I'm an architect there. I've been an architect there for since I don't know how long, since 1995. Been out of school since 1991. And I'm also a adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon University School of Architecture.
All right. Good school.
Well, again, thanks for joining us. So, Neil, why is Lee joining us?
Lee, because he said yes.
Yeah.
Good start.
He likes us.
He likes
or maybe
us.
Not. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
We'll
I don't know.
out.
Yes. So last week, actually, NCARB had a little bit of an announcement that affects licensure and schools. So with Lee being a adjunct professor, we thought it'd be great to get his input on this. But I think, Cormac, you originally sent this to me. So go ahead and explain to me exactly what this is.
Well, honestly, it's probably a huge dramatic shift in the profession if it actually is something that is endorsed, bought off on, and implemented. And it is NCARB endorses licensure upon graduation. And, the little stuff.
A new path to becoming an architect.
A new path to becoming a licensed architect, where it basically will be integrating the internship and exam requirements into the curriculum. This is their first kind of salvo into, shaking up and changing the profession, which, I think we can all agree on. More recently, and probably even in the past and a lot of the down times, we've lost a lot of young blood because, they don't really want to, I don't want to say that they don't want to stick it out, but, it's difficult. It's a difficult path to become a licensed architect. And sometimes people just don't want to go the full ride. And, and a lot of people, and I don't want to get too far into, a lot of the different comments that I was reading, but basically, a lot of people who looked at this announcement, they, really thought that it's it could be a positive thing in keeping a lot of the younger talent in the profession. So I shot it off to you guys to kind of have this discussion, and I really hope that after we have this discussion and people hear about it and go and hopefully read some of these articles and stuff, and even get through some of the comments, that we can start a dialogue on Twitter or our Facebook page or our web page, and just really kind of hear what other people think about this, because it's a really interesting subject and it's something that's really going to affect this profession for years to come.
Yeah, I think real quick we should probably mention that if you haven't subscribed to the show notes, you should go to archispeakpodcast.com and fill out the little 2 or 3 lines on the right-hand side of just about any page, and you'll get the show notes emailed to you when the show comes out. But also, why you would want to do that is because we're going to have the links to all of the sites and articles that we're talking about today, so that you can easily find that stuff. And then we'll also have links to the comments on our page so that you can add your thoughts to that conversation. So archispeakpodcast.com, and this episode will be at archispeakpodcast.com/episodes/36.
So I have a question. Evan, you haven't spoken on it. So what's your initial gut reaction, without getting into a lot of the comments yet? I'd like everybody to kind of maybe give an initial impression of what they think about this. And then we'll maybe dive in a little deeper.
Well, first of all, I think everybody's kind of has a knee-jerk reaction, and it seems to be pretty split, 50-50. But I think it's very interesting how they worded the introductory sentence. It says that the board of directors has announced their endorsement of the concept of an additional structured path that leads to licensure in a U.S. jurisdiction. So to me, I don't know if the concept comes from them even, or if it's just been brought to them over and over and over again, or, I don't know the history behind this. And I think the interesting thing to me about this is, because I'm in the middle of all this, I'm actually beyond the middle, so I get a high five for that. But they're an incredibly opaque organization, and the whole process is incredibly opaque. Now, that doesn't mean that the requirements are not easy to understand. I mean, they are written. Lots of people do it, so it's not a difficult thing. But a lot of people want to know why this, why that, and those questions go unanswered. And what's interesting to me about this is that this seems to be a clean break from the way things have been done for many, many years, to saying we're going to try other ways of accomplishing getting people licensed. And I think one of the knee-jerk reactions that I keep hearing is, this is going to piss a lot of people off, or it is pissing a lot of people off who have already gone through it. And I don't necessarily subscribe to we always have to do things the way they've always been done. And I don't think that this even has to be successful. It could fail, and that could still be okay. And I think a lot of times we get stuck in thinking that people trying things and failing is a complete failure, when really it could just be leading to more questions. It could lead to a complete different way to approach the problem. But clearly there's a problem with the licensing process where that opaqueness leads to a lot of people leaving before they even begin, or halfway through, or right before they're finished. We talked a little bit previously, and maybe not even in an episode, but about women in architecture who a lot of them are leaving because of they want to be mothers, or there's families. There's all of these different reasons why people are leaving before getting licensed. And so this seems to me to be kind of a way to try to get people licensed a lot sooner. Now, of course, I think that opens up a whole other realm of questions. Is that even a good idea? What about having a bunch of really green licensed people into the practice? So I think, my initial thing is I'm excited to see that they're actually thinking outside the box, if you will. Obviously, I don't know. It's hard to tell if it's been thought through, though.
So, Lee, I was going to jump over to Lee. Lee, when did you get your license?
I got my license back when we did it with rocks and chisels in 1995.
Oh, that would be like Neil's time.
Yeah, that's Grandpa Pan over here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was the same time about the same time I got mine. But so Lee, we've had our license for a few years now. But what's your first reaction to hearing this?
Well, I have had mixed feelings for many years because I was always an advocate for emerging professionals. I helped start the Young Architects Forum at AIA Pittsburgh when I was right after I got my license. So it was emerging professional issues were very sensitive to me at the time, and I had the passion for it, and it was something that I had the energy and I was at that point in my career. So I never want to be thought of as not being an advocate for emerging professionals, but the conversations and discussions and oftentimes complaints about the test and the program and licensure and this whole thing that we call architecture and weren't as prevalent in those days as they seem now. Titles weren't being debated and all those kinds of things. So I'm trying to find what an appropriate position is without being old and stodgy about it. I took the test on paper over a 4-day time period, and that was just how it was, and nobody questioned it at the time. The profession has changed, our culture has changed, and people's expectations of what it ought to be has changed. So, being in the teaching profession as well, I have to be very sensitive to things changing for the good and not remaining stagnant. But sometimes I think our culture wants change because they're so used to things changing as often as they change the channel or change screens on the internet or whatever they're doing, that change just seems to be part of their natural mental paradigm, that they don't know how to exist without change.
Well, Lee, let me ask you a follow-up question then. When you took your license, how much experience did you have before you decided to sit for the exam?
I tried.
Because I'm leading you into this because this is kind of where my stance on this whole subject kind of comes into play.
Sure. I graduated in 1991, and I think that was the first or second year that IDP, and you guys can explain all that to the listeners, but IDP became mandatory. And I was pretty happy that there was a road to follow. So then my goal at that point was to get it done in 3 years because that's how it was advertised. But it took me actually 3.5. So then with the sequence of the test, it actually took me 4 years from the time I graduated to the time I sat for the exam.
Okay. So
4 years.
So were you working during that time, or?
I was working for a small firm in my hometown, and I was working for an architect that was actually pretty sensitive to exposing me to all the areas of the profession. He just expected me to be the one to keep reminding him, requesting, or hey, I need to get exposure in this classification, this category, this, and we found creative ways of doing that.
Okay, well, Neil, since you were asking, what's your first initial reaction?
Well, my first reaction was, what? Bad idea, right? I mean, that was just the knee jerk. It's like, no, you can't do this. But then, I took a step back and I thought about the time I spent in Europe. I spent, pretty much my last year, 5th year at Cal Poly, which I have to give them a shout out for being placed number 1 undergraduate school in the country. So in several categories recently. In fact, I'll have to make a note of that. I got to put that in the show notes.
Don't forget to throw Auburn in there.
No, I'm not going to throw Auburn in there. I don't care.
You better.
No. Damn it. Now you mentioned it. I got to put it in. But I'm talking. I can't write show notes yet. So anyway, when I was in Italy, when they finished their program over there in architecture school, they were effectively architects at that point. And somebody can maybe correct me if I'm wrong about this. But I don't remember them having to take any extra test, or if there was, I don't remember. Maybe somebody can fill me in on that. But essentially they finished college and they were architects, and they would go out in the field and, they would work. And nobody questioned that. And so once I thought about that for a moment, and I said, well, it's not that much different than maybe some other parts of the world where they do something similar. And so, maybe something like this could work. Much like Lee, when I took the exams, it was once a year. And if you were, off schedule, I know when I took them, they were given right about the same week I graduated college. So, you graduated college. And when I finished Cal Poly in 93, I basically had to wait until June of 94 to take the exams. So there was, almost like a built-in year that I had to work before I could even sit for the exams. But just to blow a little bit of a hole in where I think you're going to go, Cormac, I started working in the profession, back in the Jurassic period, and, actually worked through school. And, so I actually had worked for about, for almost 10 years before I actually got my license. So I did have some experience. I didn't just walk out of school, graduated.
I don't think that's blowing a hole. I think that's kind of supporting kind of my stance on it,
So that's my initial stance. So, what do you think?
Well, I of course had the similar knee-jerk reaction of, this is a bad idea. And even though, like Evan was saying, this is a pretty out-of-the-box thinking about how to kind of progress the profession forward. As many times as I've said it on the show, I'm a big proponent of experience. I think that a lot of the things, and now here's where I start to split and become of two minds on this whole thing. Experience is huge. Most of everything that we do on a day-to-day basis is more based off of the experience that we've gained in the profession, working day to day, than it is based off of what we learned in school. And so here's where I start to get excited about, now we can start to realign schools to actually start to look at, and here's where I hope I don't piss Lee off, where we actually start to align the schools with the profession and have them start to focus on teaching people to become architects.
No, I don't think that's a bad statement at all. But though it's difficult in the architectural education world, is there are people of the mindset that believe we're teaching people how to think and solve problems And if you want to go into the profession, go ahead, but that isn't necessarily the primary goal. I don't share that position, but that is the mindset of some.
I was actually talking with my 13-year-old son about one of the most important things that I did learn in school is critical thinking. And I honestly think that the critical thinking portion of it that you were just talking about, that we don't really honestly get in the profession. We get the rules to live by when we're working. We get, all of the tools that we need to understand. We get our kit of parts, but we don't get the critical thinking and the kind of conceptual design mindset and stuff like that we do get in the school. But I think there's a merging of the two that will more prepare a student to be able to hit the ground running as a, architect upon graduation, as NCARB is calling it.
I think though that, I think that the educational system is really complementary to the experience part of doing your internship, right? So,
oh yeah,
I think that that's already working for the most part. I think what a lot of people, I think maybe the reason why this has even come up is because people are saying, well, I've put in all this time. I've put in 5+ years, 4+ years to get my B.Arch degree or my, whatever master's degree you've gotten on top of your bachelor's degree. How come I can't do what I want to do after putting in that time? How come I have to put in 5,600 hours of IDP on top of that? Some states don't even let you start testing until that's complete. Then you've got to go through the 7 tests on top of that. And then in California or in other states, you have to do the supplemental exam on top of that. And I think it's the average is like 7 years after graduation to becoming an architect, which means, anywhere from 0 to 14 years after graduation, people are becoming architects if they're even getting that far. I think that might be where this is coming from. It's like, how can we begin to do this sooner? But I think something that should be pointed out is that states already allow you to practice architecture by being a residential architect without having to stamp anything, right? And I think something that should be, as far as my understanding goes about what you were talking about, Neil, with Europe, is that architects over there, this is my understanding, I could be wrong, that they don't actually stamp drawings. There isn't that level of liability.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I was just a student there at the time, so really didn't get into understanding that level. And hopefully we have some listeners from around the world that can kind of chip in on the website and
that's not
really
to take
give us some information.
Away. It's not to take anything away from that. It's just saying that these are apples and oranges. They're just different.
Oh yeah, no, it's just it's the practice of architecture is, as we've discovered through this podcast, is similar all around the world, but yet, it's different all around in different parts of the world too. So, it's not to say one is better than the other, the way we do it here. Evan, I wanted to touch on a point that you just brought up because it reminds me of when I was first getting into this, and I did start working for an architect before I went off to college. And one of the things I realized was, okay, I've got X number of years in school. It'll probably take, and now at the time in California, there was no IDP, so I didn't have to worry about that. But, it was really kind of maybe, well, actually, there was no IDP, but it literally took you 8 years to become licensed. Yeah. You had to have 5 years before you could sit for the exam, which if you went to a 5-year Bachelor of Architecture program like Cal Poly, you could sit for the exam right after you graduated. But you couldn't sit for the oral exam until you had 7.5 years in. So that was, essentially 2.5 years after you finished your degree. And then even if you passed the oral exam before you had your 8 years in, you wouldn't be issued your license until 8 full years. Now, I don't know personally of anybody that was in that exact position, but most of us, basically had our 8 years in. And so essentially from starting school to getting your license in California, it was 8 years. And so,
which is the same back then also, though, you could not go to school and you could become a licensed architect after working for 8 years.
That's correct. Yes.
Which is now not an option, right? I think that's still an option in maybe not in California.
Actually, there's a few states because, Maryland actually has a path to licensure that a friend of mine is actually going after, and it's 10 years of basically apprenticeship working under an architect. I mean, he started architecture school and life just threw him a curveball. He started working, had kids and stuff, and never actually was able to finish school. And he does have the ability to become licensed after 10 years of basically a 10-year IDP.
So how is that different and or longer? If you take my case of 8 years in California is what basically was required, and that did include school. So we're not talking about years after school. So I guess really that was 3 years after school. And Lee, I heard you say that too. That was your goal,
right.
3 years after school, which was essentially what I was able to accomplish. And, when you look at 3 years, that doesn't seem so bad, but I get a little scared when I hear people talking about 7 years plus after school. That's a real deterrent, I think, to anyone entering the profession from starting school.
Look, there's
entering the profession or getting licensed.
No, it's somebody who's considering going to architecture school, looking at 5 years of school, which is more than likely, realistically 6, maybe 7, and then a 7 years after that. I mean, are we really talking about 10 to 14 years to get a license?
I'm at 17.
No,
yeah.
There's look, if you have a bachelor's of architecture degree, it's 3 years requirement, for you to start taking your test. And there's plenty of people out there that are taking the test. If you've got a master's of architecture degree, it's 2 years. And people are out there and they're doing it. We've got a kid in the office who's, 2 years of experience. He's now on his third or fourth test. So people are out there and they're doing it. So, there's a lot of people who take forever to get their license,
Company excluded, right?
And then there's, there's people who just, jump on it and get right after it. I've worked with plenty of, I call them kids because they're a lot younger than me, but anyway, they're out there and they're busting their hump and they're, getting out there and getting their license. Now, disclaimer there. Does that mean that they're more experienced and ready to be an architect than somebody who's delayed getting their license, but has been out there working and, doing CA and,
how far off the rails do you want to get here? Because I'm sure Lee has something to say about this too. I mean, why do we apply the same rules to everybody? We do that to everybody. We do it to our kids, but it's not, that you have more than one child and they are entirely different from each other. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Why do we treat everybody the same? To me, it seems like, yes, there are lots of architects, in quotes, who are ready to get their license right out of school. And there are a lot who aren't. I like that there are multiple paths to licensure and the people can pick the most appropriate one for themselves. I think the biggest scare is that people pick the inappropriate one.
Well, I actually think, the more and more I think about it, and the more and more I read the multiple comments and things like that, I actually am kind of excited about that path. The thing that I worry the most about is the internship portion of it. How is that integrated into the educational system? Now, there's been people have speculated because they haven't really put a lot of detail into what that means, licensure, license upon graduation.
Yeah, remember, they just endorsed the concept.
Right. And there's the, you've got to get schools to buy off on it. The biggest thing is you've got to get states to buy off on it, because if the states don't endorse it, it doesn't really matter. I mean, they're the ones who are giving the license, And if they say no, it's dead in the water.
Right.
But
I would imagine those conversations have begun, though.
Oh, yeah. In fact, reading the statement, the framework is out there, and it's going to take years for implementation of this. But it's an exciting opportunity. And to me, again, like to go back to what I said, I think that what it's going to do is help reshape some of the educational programs out there to start to not get rid of all of the critical thinking, the exploratory design and conceptual designs and all of the other things that make architecture school so fun. But it's going to start throwing that other element of learning, about public health and safety and welfare, I mean, because those are the things that we are really that's really what a license means, is that we understand those concepts and are able to, perform our duties to protect public health, safety, and welfare. So, I think it's going to be able to start to integrate it. I'm just interested, curious, scared, whatever you want to call it, in the internship portion of it, the experience portion, because I can tell you that as long as I've been in the profession, every year brings new experiences.
You never be ready.
Then. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you read some of these comments there. If you were waiting to be, experienced in everything, you will never become an architect, because you will never be experienced in everything. Period.
So, Lee, I'm curious, as a professor and also too, Evan, I know you've taught quite a bit as well. How do you guys see now? Cormac just mentioned there's not a lot of details about how this would get done, but how do you see implementing? I mean, we've all gone through school. It's a pretty tough program for most 5-year programs. That the one like similar to what I went through. I don't see how. I'm just curious, and I'd like to get your opinion on how do you add more curriculum in a 5-year program. Now that's an assumption. I'm assuming they can do this in 5 years, but I mean, maybe they add a 6th and everybody graduates.
20 pounds of crap into a 5-pound bag.
Actually, there's been discussion, and it may be speculation or it may be based in fact, but they were basically talking about this could be a potential of an 8-year degree.
What do you think about that, Lee?
Well, people have been questioning what architecture schools teach, even when I was just getting started. And the age-old question, what they ought to teach in school? They ought to teach, and that's been going around for a long time. And really, there's no answer to that question, because you'll never leave the school. Okay, so you have to let that one go. There's so many other things that they're trying to teach in school to try to prepare students for a global practice of architecture or a global thought process, rather than maybe the path that I chose of just being a sole proprietor. And what some schools are doing, in fact, the school I'm at is trying to do, is they're trying to cram more in the first 3 years and give students an opportunity to choose more, I wouldn't call it specialization, but more of a focus in their final 2 years, so that they can leave and pursue a direction that is more of interest to them. And it's not necessarily the same as graduate school, but it's starting to take on that flavor. So if you're really interested in sustainability and you get into energy modeling and all the things that are involved in large projects like that, that may be your thing. But if you're more interested in construction and engineering and those kinds of things, or if you're more theorist and you want to approach that point of view, and I think those options should be available to people. But then now you're saying, and you want you to be able to take this test when you leave. I don't know how you begin to do that. I really don't, because there's just so many things you can't learn in a classroom. You have to be in an office. You have to see real projects being done by real people and real money and real budgets, real codes, and the accountability that comes in an office that doesn't exist in a studio, because the studio is always hypothetical.
Exactly.
There are some things going on at Carnegie Mellon that are really exciting. There's an urban design build studio where students that take that course actually design and build a real thing. And I think they start to get that sense of accountability that comes with this profession. But if you don't take that path and you choose another path, then you can be stuck in I'll use my term from recent blog posts, you can be stuck in that ivory tower mentality of understanding architecture at more than an arm's length, rather than where most of us find ourselves in the profession. So I don't know. I thought that the semantics of their words was fascinating, because it was this big announcement, but really there was nothing behind the curtain, so to speak. It was just...
Yeah, I think it's weird, too, because one of the quotes that from NCARB CEO Michael Armstrong says, there's two things here that two quotes that I think we should talk a little bit about. But regarding what you were just saying, I'm going to kind of go out of order with these two quotes. But from their page here under the heading of Progressive Path, the second paragraph under that section says, this additional path to licensure is another concrete step to reimagining and reconfiguring each part of the process. And it goes on. But I thought that was really interesting that this is a concrete step, when I agree with what you're saying, Lee. It just doesn't seem committal at all.
No.
Not at all.
So how is it a concrete step? I mean, is it just like we're just saying it out loud, therefore it's a concrete step? I don't get it. Maybe
there's a lot of criticism. There's a lot of criticism of NCARB these days because of the fees and because of wondering, well, what do you guys really do? Why do I pay you money, and what do you really do? And I understand the criticisms there. I don't share all of them, so I don't know if they're trying to do damage control, or
like, look at us, we're doing something.
I don't know. I've never thrown them under the bus like many people have, but at the same time, I think they're trying to position themselves very carefully in this profession. And I have to question myself so much, because I like things to stay the way they are, and that's not healthy. But at the same time, I'm not one to shift a paradigm merely because I can.
Well, I was kind of curious about it, because it was, that was one of the first things that I thought as well, Evan, was the vagueness of the whole thing. And I almost felt like they threw it out there to gauge the reaction of the profession. Because, I mean, this announcement has caught on like wildfire. I have seen it in so many different things. I've got so many different architecture friends that are on Facebook and LinkedIn and everywhere else. And
I think, though, for people who aren't on those social networks, like I asked around the office today, and people are like, nope, haven't heard of it.
But if you have that conversation with them, you will get probably 1,001 different opinions, ideas, and thoughts on that. And if you were able to basically sum those up and send them on in, I'm curious if one of the things they wanted to do is throw it out there, get the opinion of, or at least, kind of set the fire and see how people react.
Right.
And then even start to throw out ideas of how it could work. It'd be interesting to see if that was kind of their intent, is to, because, I mean, you throw it out there, you make, a bold statement or a proclamation, but with no real concrete idea of how that would work. But they even admit in here that, this is just the conceptual phase, that it's not, that this is an idea they have. They had all of these different, professionals kind of get together in their licensure task force. And,
well, I have a question for Lee regarding the first quote that I wanted to get back to here, which is, NCARB is engaged in streamlining and simplifying the licensing process for aspiring architects, and we are actively re-engineering all the elements of the architectural licensing process, education, experience, and examination to focus on facilitation of licensing. I mean, Lee, how open do you think schools are to NCARB re-engineering their curriculum?
I don't think they're going to be as open as they think they are, because again, many schools are going to take the stance that they don't want to pigeonhole their students into following traditional practice.
Prescriptive thing.
The prescriptive practice. I mean, that was all I ever wanted to do, but the more students I'm around, and over the last, I've been teaching since 2002, the more students I'm around and the more of academia that I'm around, the more I'm becoming sensitive or open to the fact that you can go through this crazy thing of school that we all went through and do something else. I don't know why you would do that, but well, that's fine.
I find it very interesting, though, that, you know, people go through that process. Like, I wouldn't trade that process for the world. But when you get into a large corporate culture, you can immediately see why you wouldn't want to be a part of this.
Yeah.
Because,
yeah.
I mean, that's kind of obvious, right? But you look at the, I guess what NCARB is asking you to do is buy into the continuum of keeping this broken thing going for as long as possible up to this point, up until this announcement. To me, this is directly saying, if we don't change something, these students who are going to change the world, whether they're in architecture or not, are just going to do that. So why don't we give them a way to be able to do that? Because it really does seem, again, this is from my experience, it's pretty broken, right? And so how are we going to fix that? It's not going to be by not doing anything about it, by changing and saying, hey guys, everybody has to do what I did.
Well, what's broken is debatable, because what is the real reason it's taking so long to get licensed? Is it because the test is so expensive? Is it because the test is so difficult? I really want to know the answer to that, because, again, my mindset was so narrow. I came from a time period where there was only one way, and nobody questioned it. It was just, yep, we're taking this test, and you pulled yourself up by the bootstraps and you dug your heels in. But then who am I to judge that process? But I think people's goals are just so different. When I came out of school, all I ever wanted was that license. So I just made decisions that allowed me to get it as soon as possible. But everybody doesn't share the same set of values.
Well, let me throw this in. Whereas your notion was that you wanted to get the license.
Right.
Mine is I wanted to get the experience.
Sure.
I felt like I didn't. I've always believed that, you know, there's a level of experience that you need to have before you can call yourself an architect. And to me,
how do you know when is enough, though?
But it's for me. You know, I mean, I can sit and I can
He's
judge.
still trying to figure that out, Evan. He's not licensed yet.
I can sit and look at people that have the license and say, wow, you just took a test. That's all you did, because you are not, I don't know how or why you're calling yourself an architect, but you're not.
Well, I think you're really getting at a really critical issue, Cormac, because everybody wants to use the title, and I know that's a whole nother firestorm.
Oh, yeah.
But you have defined for yourself what an architect is, and it's pretty high, which is what I did as well. And you're setting up a challenge, and you're respecting the profession, and you feel that you can't be an architect until you achieve whatever your standards are. I wish everybody had that mindset.
I agree with that as well. I feel like we're on a similar path, and I honestly feel like, it's not just me who feels this way in my firm, but I feel like I can't even take on the next level of our corporate structure without being an architect, a licensed architect. There are other people who are unlicensed in that same position. And I don't think that that's the right thing to do. I mean, just to be completely transparent about that, I mean, our CEO of our architecture company is not a licensed architect. And to me, there's that standard isn't existent with certain people. But I agree with what you're saying, Cormac. Like, if you really want to be an architect, you definitely have to have that experience. And this is skirting that for sure, this announcement.
Well, I mean, let me just throw a few examples out. We've got people in the office who are taking their exams now, and the level of questions that they're still asking, to me, I feel like they need more experience before kind of they don the cloak of being, termed an architect. Because, I mean, there are these questions that they ask are just like, wow, I mean, in turn, these same people are actually far more advanced in their desire, their will to learn, the way that they question, their critical thinking. I think they're ready to make that leap forward, but there's just something about it that I kind of feel like, they're not quite ready yet, but they're the people that have the drive and the focus to be there. And those are the people that I want to encourage to be the next, level of, just be the next architects, be the next leaders in the profession, because they are good enough to actually do this. But, with as much experience that I have, you just kind of feel, you got this gut feeling that you're there almost, kind of thing.
Well, hey, Cormac, I want to mention something here, because you bring up a good point, but I think that where you're going is, how do you define an architect?
When the master says you're ready.
Well, yeah. Is it then? Because, okay, let me, I want to circle back around to this, because I feel, by your definition, I'm not an architect. And let me see where I mean by that. When I graduated in the early 90s, it was a similar sort of work environment that we've experienced over the last 5 years. And so it was really hard to find a job. So I took whatever I could get, and eventually, was given, landed a job for a firm that basically did production housing. And I know we've talked about that before. And so that's what I spent the majority of that kind of set my career path, right? I mean, that when I was in school, that wasn't what I wanted to do, right? It's like that old comic, when I grew up, I didn't want to be a drug dealer or something, right? That you've seen that cartoon. But, when I was going through school, I didn't say, oh, I want to go work for a firm that designs production housing or tract housing, right? That's not what my goal was, but it was the first job I got, and it was a good job. It was local, and, it was a lot of fun. And there was for those that are listening, that may not have any high regard for that, because I see it a lot around the profession. And I think, it's kind of like the scum of the earth when it comes to architecture. You kind of have, the star architects, and then, you have the other architects that do residential work. They're pretty much ignored, by most people, except for, once a year when record houses come out and everybody goes, ooh and ah. And then you've got, the bottom dwellers down here. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is that I've always kind of felt, as I knock this chip off my shoulder here, that, I'm not a real architect, because I don't do that other type of architecture, whatever that other type of architecture is. And there's materials and methods that I know nothing about, that I've not had any experience with. And so does that make me less of an architect? I mean, hey, yeah, you're right. I passed the damn test. You know what? I can call myself an architect, but am I really an architect? Because all I've ever really done is this kind of residential stuff, right?
No. Let me back up here so that we can kind of clear up the mud that I just raked up.
I'm not taking it personal, but I think it's interesting to how do we because this is essentially what this question is getting to is how do you define who an architect is? Is an architect who say this program, however it's implemented, if it ever gets implemented, happens, and whether it's a 5-year, 6-year, or 8-year program, you graduate and you have your license. Are they really architects?
Well, first let me state one of the reasons why I have kind of this like experience is your education type mentality is, first, you all know I went from high school to the U.S. Army. I spent 9 years in the military, and I have a military mindset that I bring to my day-to-day operations of this profession called architecture. I truly believe that, for me to move up into the ranks in the Army, I had to show a level of competency and expertise of my job. And that was the only way that I could move forward, is that showing that I have mastered those skills and that I'm ready for the next level of skills and stuff. And so I've always kind of believed that was, how I was going to approach architecture, is that I needed to master a certain level of skill, basically to feel competent enough to be able to say, all right, if somebody entrusted me with a building, whether it's a house or a school or anywhere in between, that I have a level of competency and confidence in myself that I could be able to do that building and not get sued or not fall down or all these other things, that I understood that I can take my sketch from scribble to, construction administration and all the way through. And I understand all of those. That was for me. That's what I wanted to do. You call it, and I don't necessarily think that you were taking offense to how I was talking about real architect and all this other stuff. You've got a level of confidence and competency in your residential design and architecture. Of course, you're an architect, and I almost feel like I need to jump on the defensive, but I know
no, please don't. I'm just kind of using that as an example, how do we define who an architect is? Is an architect who strictly kind of does residential architecture or may do a specific type of residential architecture? Is that an architect?
Neil, let me jump in and say,
sure.
I appreciate the self-deprecating attitude and the humility. I think that's nice. But for all the things that you aspire or respect from architects that do very large projects, I bet there's equal number of things that you do and can do that they can't. Not because of intellectual ability or whatever, but just because of experience or where you are in life, the things you deal with, the problems you solve, the clients you please, are skills that you have that they may not have. And I'm not trying to put them down either, because they're building big, complicated buildings. I just don't think you can define it in a singular way that you may be looking for.
Right. Well, I'm not necessarily looking for a certain way, but I think it parallels to the question of who is an architect? Are you an architect when you have, as Cormac's saying, a certain level of expertise and then you have your license, or as NCARB is proposing here, when you finish school, you're now an architect. So I think that kind of comes back to where we started. My initial reaction to this announcement was, wow, bad idea. But then as the more I thought about it, it's like, well, maybe it's not a bad idea. And I kind of fall with how each Lee and Evan, you both touched on We shouldn't always get stuck in this is the way we've always done it. Because Lee, when you mentioned that when you first came out and you took the exams, we didn't question that. That was the path that we were on, and pretty much most of the people I went to school with, we were all on that sort of path. Now, I think a lot of us, diverged after that, and some of us became architects, some of us didn't. But you're right, we didn't really question it. So I find it strangely exciting that we've had a lot of issues with this profession, and they've grown over time. And how do we address them? And maybe this is one way that we can begin to address things from the bottom up, from when you start, right from school. Maybe we can start to reshape our profession. So we can encourage people to get into the profession and stay in the profession, and find a way so that they can have the experience and get themselves a license, so they don't have to spend 15 or 20 years after they've graduated and still not have a license that they can call themselves an architect.
Let me just ask a side question that I've been wanting to ask, and this is a little bit different from what we were just talking about, and that's if this gets implemented and we start to require schools to have a level of basically the IDP standards are kind of like overlaid into that particular degree path. Do you think, and here's I'm going to love this one. Do you think the professors and in academia are ready and able and capable of teaching practical experience? Now, Lee, you've got a different take on this because you're a practicing architect. And There are a lot of professors that are practicing, sole practitioners, or even, in smaller firms. But then there is a lot of professors that haven't even practiced.
Yeah. Does NCARB know that most professors in architecture school are not licensed?
You're poking at a bee's nest.
I know that's
what we do on this show.
And that may be a completely different, podcast topic altogether. But, so let me just throw this out here and why I asked this. So I started school, ran out of money, went and I worked for an architecture firm for 4 years, saved up enough money to go back to school and finish up my degree. But in that time, I did everything from basically basic drafting all the way up to project management and CA in those 4 years. So I had a lot of practical experience and actually had built buildings that I designed that I went through the whole CA process with in those 4 years. And when I went back to school, I had more experience in the actual profession than almost all of my professors. And so you sit there and people like me wonder, like, well, why are these guys teaching me if they don't have a license? They don't have the practical experience. They've never really practiced, but now they're preparing me to become the next wave of, architectural professional when they really aren't.
Well, I think the part of your answer is that what they're really doing? Is that what some schools, is that what all the schools are doing?
Well, let me back up here because I don't want to devalue the what I learned from them though. There's a lot of, and this isn't for any possible old professor that might actually listen to this show.
Quit backpedaling here.
There were
just
actually
lay it
not
out
talking
there.
about you.
Yeah, I'm not talking about you. Yeah, you. No. You move out of the way. You.
Well, but Cormac, I don't think you really need to defend yourself because I think that you raise an interesting question, and that is, is the goal of architecture school, or should, I mean, maybe that's a question I'll put out for you, Lee, and Evan, you too, as a teacher once, is the goal of architecture school to churn out people that can be licensed? Or is it the goal of, and it may be different for each different school too. I recognize that, or is it the goal of that school to teach people how to think and how to maybe design and to eventually, become good architects?
But Neil, before Evan and Lee jump into this, the point of what we're talking about here is this particular program idea of being a licensed architect upon graduation.
Sure.
So you sort of answered one of your questions just by, if this particular program is implemented, they have to meet every criteria of a licensed.
Well, okay, you're right. And so that brings,
includes,
right,
to me, that includes somehow in this particular path experience.
Right. Okay. Well, let's let Lee jump in on that then, before I jump in.
My personal opinion, not the opinion of my school, but my personal opinion is you go to architecture school to become an architect. But maybe I'm old school in how I look at higher education. I never understood going to school to learn about the world and life and get to know myself and find myself and all those kinds of things. And I'm not necessarily being critical of those who have chosen that path. But for me, I went to architecture school because that's how I would become an architect. It was that simple. So my personal opinion is you go to architecture school to become an architect. But I don't think I'm even in a majority.
Is that even possible?
You're not, but you know what, Lee? You've garnered even more respect for me than you already had, which was, high up there, because I agree with you. Why are you actually choosing to go to architecture school?
And for
to
me,
become an architect.
And I got into architecture school so that I could get a license, because not getting the license was a failure. It was like that journey, that path to climb the top of the mountain, or whatever you want to call it. Maybe I'm overly dramatizing the path to becoming an architect, but where I came from a families where not too many people even went to college.
Mm-hmm.
So to become a licensed professional was huge. But nowadays, everybody goes to college. Well, not everybody, but a lot more people go to college nowadays than they used to. And there's just an expectation of, well, I went to school, so I deserve this and I deserve that. And I'm not trying to overly criticize this generation, but I came from an old Italian mindset that you worked hard and eventually you got something. And, I'm at the tail end of those old ethnic values. And so I have to constantly re-examine myself, because I think I'm becoming crotchety and old and fuddy-duddy and opinionated in my 40s here. And I have to ask myself if I'm looking at things with a fresh eye like school teaches you.
Well, Lee, what do you think your school thinks about that question? Is the goal of going to Carnegie Mellon to be a licensed professional, to be a licensed architect?
I don't think there's a common mindset right now, and I don't know which side it would fall on if you had to do that.
It's complicated.
It is, and I'm not full time, so I'm not amongst the full-time senior faculty enough to even want to speak for them, and I wouldn't speak for them anyway. But I teach my studio as if my students are going to go on to become architects, and no one has ever told me not to. But at the same time, I don't cut off their ability to think and to reason and to be lateral thinkers as well as deep thinkers. But at the end of the day, I want them to have skills that they can use to get a job to pay off their student loan. but to feel good about themselves. Now, if they choose to be a painter in Paris someday, then great, fantastic, because I think those skills that you learn in architecture school are tremendous for any other profession you get involved in. But my personal narrow-minded opinion is that should be an anomaly, not the norm, that the norm should be that we should be inviting these people into the profession. But I take it one step further, and I'll go out and speak my own opinion here, that I think we need to allow for more types of students to get into the profession that aren't necessarily strong designers, but have other skills that can offer this profession, that they're not all going to be superstar designers. But somehow we've elevated that as being, the pinnacle of architecture school.
Yeah, well, that kind of falls under the thing you were saying earlier about always wanting the new and the change. I mean, that's what Arc Daily is all about, right? It's what's the next post.
Right. And I'll go one step further, that there seems to be a tacit understanding that these people are going to go out from architecture school and join global, well-known, published firms. And I often tell my students to go back to small-town America and make a difference where they're at, because people need architects in those areas because of the abilities and skills that they have. They can transform a community. New York City doesn't need any more architects. That's an opinion, but
probably a valid one.
Actually, I think it's a great opinion. I mean, because when a buddy of mine and I were making the decision to kind of go out on our own, his argument to me was, do you want to be a small fish in a big pond, or do you want to be a big fish in a small pond and make a bigger impact on the design of this? It was North Florida. And, do we want to have a greater impact on the design and planning and stuff of the projects that we're going to be doing, where we could, have that direct impact. And you're right. I think I kind of actually wish that more people would think that way, is that, small town America or small town wherever, needs architects as much as, the big New Yorks and Chicagos and LAs and stuff like that.
There's plenty of work for everybody, though.
There is. In fact, actually, there probably could be more if we weren't, kind of turning our nose up against, over I don't really want to do this small house addition. Well, why not? You know what? That house needs an architect. If if they're going to make an addition, would you rather an architect do that, addition, or a contractor that's just going to slap something up and it has no character, no nothing, and
there you go, poking a bee's nest again.
I know.
I know how I'd answer that question, but
I know exactly, and that was that's your forte, man. I mean, and so back to yours, yeah. We need architects like you, Neil, getting out there and getting after all, any shape and size of project. Because I want this place to be pretty.
Well, guys, have we beaten this subject up enough to turn it loose on everyone else to give us comments?
Yeah, probably not, but...
No. We could go on forever, but honestly, I would really love to hear from everybody else and see what their opinions and thoughts are, and how most people think that I'm full of crap.
Oh, wow. I can guarantee you this will be the most comments we ever get now with that opening. So where do you find it? So where do you leave those comments? Come to our website at archispeakpodcast.com. And you'll find our Twitter accounts and a link to the Archispeak podcast Facebook page, which we'd like people to make some comments on there. It's been kind of lonely over there. Or if you have something that you just need to share, with using your voice. We have a telephone line you can call. I don't think people know about this, Evan. Nobody ever calls it. So, yes, we do have a phone number. You can call us at 415-484-8496. And please do so, because the Google translation is a lot of fun to read. So, give us a little bit of entertainment. And we enjoy that. And if you haven't done so already, please leave us a review on iTunes. We especially love those. And I think maybe what we can start doing is we can start mentioning some names of people that leave reviews on iTunes.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
We've got some good ones lately.
Yeah, absolutely. So we should do that too. And then we should thank Lee for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lee. This is a great conversation.
Well, thank you for letting me join you. I've been listening for so long. It's an honor.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's great, and especially on short notice, and we really appreciate your perspective.
Thank you. And let me stress to everybody out there about these comments that we're really hoping we get. This particular topic of almost any other topic that we've ever had, this is the future of our profession. This is going to have a direct impact on, the way that we teach, we license, we practice. So, let's hear your opinions.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, everyone, stay subscribed, and thanks again for listening.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night. It's late here.
Good morning for us.
That's true.
What you get. This is what you get. This is the schedule. This is the set. It's unpredictable as you forget.